One major problem, and I think it is a kind of what we should call a kind of epistemic violence, violence with regard to knowledge as such, a kind of extreme, monolithic, generalized vision about Islam. If you have that kind of a totally monolithic view, that means that is the process through which an enemy is created. So, traditional Orientalist discourses about Islam was along those lines. So you could attach them with the notion of the barbarians, the Europeans being the civilized. If the Europeans have to become civilized, you should create barbarians out there, isn't it? Then only they can become civilized. Otherwise, they cannot. So that kind of a discourse was happening. This is precisely what is happening, especially after September 11 developments, etc., of generalizing the Islamic world, and never, these journalists or even academic people in the universities, never giving credence to a very complex, dynamic history of Islam.
When we talk about West Asia and Gaza, whether it's Gaza, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, or any other country, the central discussion in some forums mostly come across the discussion surrounding Islam. So you've been associated with studies surrounding Islam and Islamic societies for long. Where is Islam as an ideology or a belief system or an idea stands in between all the conflict, whether it's the gender or the political conflicts happening in Saudi or in Gaza or anywhere? Because the first question in social media or any other discussion forums, it comes up to, this is an Islamic problem. In India, when you go to X or Facebook or Instagram, people would say that these Muslims are like that, this is the Islam's problem. So when you look at the whole affairs, where is Islam in the whole discourse?
One major problem, and I think it is a kind of what we should call a kind of epistemic violence, violence with regard to knowledge as such, a kind of extreme, monolithic, generalized vision about Islam. If you have that kind of a totally monolithic view, that means that is the process through which an enemy is created. So, traditional Orientalist discourses about Islam was along those lines. So you could attach them with the notion of the barbarians, the Europeans being the civilized. If the Europeans have to become civilized, you should create barbarians out there, isn't it? Then only they can become civilized. Otherwise, they cannot. So that kind of a discourse was happening. This is precisely what is happening, especially after September 11 developments, etc., of generalizing the Islamic world, and never, these journalists or even academic people in the universities, never giving credence to a very complex, dynamic history of Islam, its philosophical traditions, scientific traditions, very diverse ways in which Islam as a lived religion is working in various societies. West Asia is only a small part of the Muslim world. The larger part of the Muslim world in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Indonesia, Malaysia, here, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so on. And Africa, many parts of Africa and so on. West Asia in population terms is only a small part of it. But when we talk about the Islamic world, it is West Asia that it comes to people. There is a point, because Islam was born there, and there's no doubt about it. But that's not the whole Islamic world. So Indonesian Islam, for example, Saudi Islam, Egyptian Islam, Iranian Islam,
Kerala Islam,
and Central Asian Islam, Kerala Islam, American Islam. Everything is put together. That monolithic view is precisely what was generated out of many attempts. Traditional Orientalism on the one hand, and notions like clash of civilizations, Huntington and others, that there is one Islamic kind of thing in opposition to Western civilization and so on. What about Islamic contributions to Western civilization? Ibn Rushd, for example, whose works on Aristotle and Ibn Sina's work as well, Al-Farabi's work for that matter, but Ibn Rushd's work in particular from Islamic Spain. Those works, it was these Islamic thinkers that they were giving Europe a new interpretation of rationality. In Aristotelian notions of rationality, Islamic thinkers were generating that kind of a knowledge, which was influencing the birth of European modernity. How is Islam in opposition to Europe? They themselves were part of it, the Andalusian tradition as such, Cordoba, Seville, all places, and their linkage with North Africa for that matter, and so on and so forth. So there is this image of Islam which is typically, connected with certain political movements that emerged in the 20th century. Starting from the Muslim Brotherhood, but more so about the ISIS or the Taliban and things like that. Al-Qaeda and so on. That's not the whole of Islam, the Muslim world or Islam. So whether it is the interpretation of the texts of Islam by various scholars and even political figures, they interpret it very differently. And another movement, Rashid Ghanouzi's interpretation of Islam is different. Very different from a Saudi cleric's interpretation of Islam. And therefore, this violence that I was talking about, the epistemic violence that I was talking about, is this kind of extreme monolithic understanding of Islam in order that an enemy can be created. So, the kind of every Muslim then becomes a terrorist, isn't it, in this discourse? It is a discursively constructed idea. A person believing in Islam in any part of the world have nothing to do with that kind of descriptions, isn't it? But these descriptions these discourses are so powerful because it is created for these kinds of purposes with imperialist kind of intent and purposes, then that discursively constructed reality becomes a reality. So Iraq can be attacked because the whole notion is these terrorists have to be.
We can take Gaza like that.
Gaza, the whole description about Palestinians and their movements. Well, take the case of anything. Afghanistan, this was done. So whether the reality of the Muslim people and these discourses do not match.
Yes.
So people find these application of these discourses and finding exact people according to those descriptions and treating everyone like that. This is the danger that is being created. Extreme kind of violence in terms of journalistic, descriptions, academic descriptions, in the creation of values and knowledges. That was a big problem.